Hello everyone. Welcome to the 7th session of our casual book club, in which we discuss the Silmarillion in detail, going over every word of every chapter, discussing our thoughts and trying to understand the whole story of Tolkien's universe. Today we will be covering chapter 4 of Quenta Silmarillion, of Thingol and Melian. Melian was a Maya, of the race of the Valar. She dwelt in the gardens of Lorien, and among all his people there were none more beautiful than Melian, nor more wise, nor more skilled in songs of enchantment. It is told that the Valar would leave their works, and the birds of Valinor their mirth, that the bells of Valmar were silent, and the fountains ceased to flow, when at the mingling of the lights Melian sang in Lorien. Nightingales went always with her, and she taught them their song. And she loved the deep shadows of the great trees. She was akin before the world was made to Yavanna herself, and in that time when the Quendi awoke beside the waters of Quevienen, she departed from Valinor and came to the hitherlands. And there she filled the silence of Middle-earth before the dawn with her voice and the voices of her birds. So from the previous chapters, we know that the Ainur included two types of beings, two types of powers, two types of spirits. The higher tier were called the Valar, and the lower tier were called the Maiar. We also found out that the Maiar are people of Valar, and that each Valar has a set of Maiar who serves them and are subject to that Valar. So Melian is a Maya, and what do we learn about her from this passage? Well, first is that she's really beautiful. As we know that the Maiar were permitted to take up different forms, here we are to assume that Melian took the form similar to an elvish lady. We also learn that she's skilled in songs of enchantment, and we can say it's magical, but bear in mind that I am being careful in using that term, magic or magical, because it means quite different in the world we live in when we hear magic. Because in Tolkien's world and his universe, magic means something really different than what we are used to. Another thing we learn is that, like other Maiar we met so far, she's in service of or akin to Yavanna, and thus we can understand why nightingales went always with her and she taught them their song. Because Yavanna is the Vala who loves and made everything that grows and walks the earth, like birds and other kind of beasts. I won't say monsters, but beasts, just four-legged creatures. So as the Quendi, the Elves, as they awoke beside the waters of Quevienen, she leaves Valinor and comes to Middle-earth. We don't know exactly why, but we can assume it's because either she also, like the other Valar, really loved the Elves, the firstborn of Ilúvatar, the children of Ilúvatar, and wants to teach them, and wants to bestow knowledge on them of what she knows, or it's because she wants to stay the corruption of Melkor and heal the hurts that he's causing in Middle-earth. Or it could be just a little bit of both of these things. But regardless of the reason, she does come and abide in Middle-earth. Much like Yavanna and Orome were the only two of the Vala who would come to Middle-earth often. She's one also who came to Middle-earth, and unlike them, she pretty much stays here and just sings the songs, heals the forest with her voice, and that's what she does. Now their journey was near its end, as has been told. The people of the Teleri rested long in East Beleriand, beyond the river Gallian, and at that time many of the Noldor still lay to the westwards, in those forests that were afterwards called Neldoreth and Region. Elve, lord of the Teleri, went often through the great woods to seek out Finwë his friend in the dwellings of Noldor, and it chanced on a time that he came alone to the starlight wood of Nan Elmoth, and there suddenly he heard the song of the nightingales. Then an enchantment fell on him, and he stood still, and afar off beyond the voices of Lomelindi he heard the voice of Melian, and it filled all his heart with wonder and desire. He forgot then utterly all his people and all the purposes of his mind, and following the birds under the shadow of the trees, he passed deep into Nan Elmoth and was lost. But he came at last to a glade open to the stars, and there Melian stood, and out of the darkness he looked at her, and the light of Aman was in her face. Wow, that's really beautiful. Okay, so it might be of interest to you, our listeners, a slightly better version, or just which includes a few more lines which are really important of this passage, which is given in Quenta Silmarillion, which is the earlier draft version of the Silmarillion. This, I believe, would explain things a bit better, especially in understanding my use of the word magic before. Also, Tolkien here is more explicit in calling the Valar gods, and we also get a clear answer to our question earlier about why did Melian go to Middle-earth. So here's the passage that I want you guys to know. Melian was a fae. In the gardens of the Vala Lorien she dwelt, and among all his fair folk none were there that surpassed her beauty, nor none more wise, nor none more skilled in magical and enchanting songs. It is told that the gods would leave their business and the birds of Valinor their mirth, that Valmar's bells were silent and the fountains ceased to flow, when at the mingling of light Melian sang in the gardens of the god of dreams. Nightingales went always with her, and their songs she taught them, but she loved deep and shadow, and often strayed on long journeys into the outer lands, Middle-earth, and there filled the silence of the dawning world with her voice and the voices of her birds. So as you can see in this passage, we can see here that one is called Outer Lands as Middle-earth. So she used to come to Middle-earth often, and she would sing songs there and try to just fill the silence of the world with her voice and the voices of her birds. And also it mentions she was none more skilled in magical and enchanting songs. So that's what I mean. That's magic. That's her magic. Okay, so now that we have been introduced to Melian, we go back to where we left off before we do that, since today's chapter is really short, I think it would be the best time to recap the journey so far as it regards to the elves and their sundering and divide, and factions and kindreds, and especially the names. Tolkien was a name guy, and I believe I am as well. Quendi. Quendi, that's what the elves who awoke beside Quivian call themselves. When Orome discovers them there, he calls them Eldar, all of them Eldar. Later, when the Valar summon the Quendi, three kindreds of the elves answer the call and are thence called Eldar, and other kindreds refuse and are thence called Avari. None of the stories mention anything about whatever happened to Avari or what became of them, but if rumors are to be believed, then we can assume that at least some of them were turned into orcs, and now remain as but a mockery of what they once were. But let's get back to the Eldar. Eldar were divided into three factions, three kindreds. First, people of Ingwe, who are the smallest company, and are called the Vanyar. People of Finwë, they are more in number than the Vanyar and are called the Noldor. And people of Elwë and Olwë, who are brothers. They were the largest group in number and are called the Teleri. Remember that so far in our journey, only Ingwe, Finwë, and Elwë have beheld the light of the two trees of Valinor. So during the journey to the west to the blessed realm of Valinor, Vanyar and Noldor are completely committed to it and are steadfast. They believe they are kings and really want to see the Valar and the light of the two trees. Teleri, however, have doubts, and they do like how beautiful Middle-earth is and its spaciousness and all the places in it and its lakes and its rivers and its forests and the whole feel of it. So when they come to the Misty Mountains, we have the second sundering, as we found out last week. Some elves under their leader Lenwë and his son Denethor split from Elwë and Olwë and became known as Nandor, the Wood Elves, and later Sylvan Elves. They settled in Greenwood, which was later known as Mirkwood, and the surrounding areas, remaining near to the river Anduin. Vanyar and Noldor kept going on and followed Orome and came into Beleriand. Elwë and Olwë did stay behind for a bit after the split of Nandor, but eventually they too went on and came into Beleriand. Later, much later, Denethor, the son of Lenwë, regretted this decision of his father and led a small group of Nandor over the Misty Mountains, and eventually he too came into Beleriand, and they are known as Lyquendi, the Green Elves, and they resided in Osiriand. We'll learn the geography of Beleriand in the later chapter. When the elves saw that the great ocean was really vast and dangerous, they got afraid of it, and the Vala Orome left them to seek counsel of Manwë as to what to do next and how to bring the Eldar to Valinor. So while Orome went away, Vanyar and Noldor settled there on the western side of Beleriand, and the Teleri, Olwë, Elwë, and their people, they settled on the eastern side. As you remember, Elwë was good friends with Finwë from earlier chapter. He would often go to meet him. It was in one of these journeys that he learned the song, or he heard the song of nightingales, and an enchantment fell on him. This we can say was magic. He was under a magic spell. Remember that after the Quendi awoke, Melian had come to live in Middle-earth, and it was in Beleriand where she lived. And also remember that about Melian, none more skilled in Song of Enchantment, or if we go with the version in the Quenta Silmarillion, none more skilled in Song of Magic and Enchantment. This is the magic I was talking about before. There is no spell or a wand or a staff that she is waving to cast these magic spells. It's just power of the words spoken, of song, a song of magic, a song of wizardry. So Elwë heard this song, heard voice of Melian the Maya, and he just fell in a trance state. He was mesmerized, enchanted, utterly forgot himself, his people, his life, his name, his purpose, and even the light of the two trees of Valinor he forgot. He just stood there in wonder and stood there with desire. He follows the voice deeper into the woods and finally beholds Melian. Remember, among all his people there were none more beautiful than Melian? Well, there we go. The light of the blessed realm and even the light of the two trees was in her face. She's the most beautiful being ever that Elwë or anyone has ever seen. We'll get back to this graph of the Quendi and their division and sundering because more are coming soon. But let's get on with our story. She spoke no word, but being filled with love, Elwë came to her and took her hand, and straightway a spell was laid on him, so that they stood thus while long years were measured by the wheeling stars above them, and the trees of Nan Elmoth grew tall and dark before they spoke any word. So, did they really stood there holding hands while trees grew, time passed, and hundreds of years passed by? Or is it just a way for the writer or the person who heard these stories from the Valar to comprehend how big this moment is, for the writer to emphasize the importance of this moment? Um, I don't know the answer to those questions, but I don't think anyone does. It's just speculation. We also discussed magic and enchantment. So maybe many years did pass while they stood there holding hands in silence. I mean, they're both immortals, so it's not out of the realm of possibility, especially given the fact that one of them is a Maya, a spirit from beyond this world, a spirit older than this world. Maybe this was her magic. So whatever it was, whether literal or figurative, this is a big moment. This is a unique moment. This is one of a kind moment. An elf fell in love with a Maya. Thus Elwë's folk who sought him found him not, and Olwë took the kingship of the Teleri and departed, as is told hereafter. Elwë Singollo came never again across the sea to Valinor, so long as he lived, and Melian returned not thither while their realm together lasted. But of her there came among both elves and men a strain of the Ainur, who were with Ilúvatar before Ea. In after days he became a king renowned, and his people were all the Eldar of Beleriand. The Sindar they were named, the Grey Elves, the Elves of the Twilight, and King Greymantle was he, Thingol, in the tongue of that land, and Melian was his queen, wiser than any child of Middle-earth, and their hidden halls were Menegroth, the 1,000 caves in Doriath. Great power Melian lent to Thingol, who was himself great among the Eldar, for he alone of all the Sindar had seen with his own eyes the trees in the day of their flowering. And king though he was of Amaniar, he was not accounted among the Mori Quendi, but with the elves of the light, mighty upon Middle-earth. And of the love of Thingol and Melian there came into the world the fairest of all the children of Ilúvatar that was or shall ever be. Wow, that's just amazing. So much to unpack in this part. So let's start. So how long did the elves, the Teleri, they looked for Elwë? Was it 100 years? Was it 1,000 years? We don't know. But after a while, Olwë took the kingship of the Teleri. They were brothers. They were both brothers of brother kings. So Olwë takes up the mantle of kingship of the Teleri now. So now we have Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri under Ingve, Finwë, and Olwë respectively, awaiting the Vala Orome to come back from Valinor and to lead them over the ocean to Valinor. While Elwë got enchanted, fell in love, and nothing could separate him from Melian or Melian from him. Elwë never came to Valinor as long as he lived, and neither did Melian. Another thing, not all the Teleri went with Olwë across the sea. Many remained behind because they did not want to abandon their search for their lord Elwë. Here we have another sundering of the Elves, split of Teleri once more. The ones who followed Olwë across the sea are called Falmari, Sea Elves, and those who did not but remained in Beleriand, they are called Sindar, Grey Elves. So we can go back to our graph here in this picture. As you can see, these are Falmari, the people who followed Olwë, and the ones who remained in Beleriand trying to find Elwë, they are Sindar. They became the Grey Elves. And it's these Sindar elves who take Elwë and Melian as their king and queen and call him Thingol in their newly developed tongue of Sindarin. So we can assume that before this time the elves spoke Quenya, and or Quenya, however you want to pronounce it. And then in Beleriand, the Sindar elves who remained behind in Middle-earth and took up Thingol and Melian as their king and queen, they formed this new language called Sindarin. It's from their union that a strain of the Ainur came among the elves and men, but that is a separate story which we will get to in a few weeks. But just as a teaser, who they mean with this line, what is meant by this line, it's Elrond and Aragorn. They are the ones who have blood of Ainur in them through Luthien, who was daughter of this union between an elf and a Maya, Luthien who married a mortal man named Beren. These unions are really fascinating topic for Tolkien as well as for me, and we would get into them really in detail in due time. Also, another important point of note here is none of the Sindar elves have seen the light of the two trees of Valinor, save only Thingol himself. So, going once more to our chart, let's return and let's start again. Just a brief summary, just so everyone gets it, and because it's fascinating, it's really fascinating. All these names are fascinating to me, so I'm gonna get into them deep. Every single Vanyar, every single Noldor, and every single Teleri who went with Olwë will go on to see the light of the two trees of Valinor and would be called Calaquendi, the Elves of the Light, the High Elves. While Sindar Elves, Nandor Elves, and Lyquendi Elves, though being Eldar, all three of them, would not see the light of the two trees and would be called Moriquendi. Thingol being the only Sindar who has seen the light of the two trees. But a point should be made here clear that since the Sindar did not refuse the journey west from Orome, when Orome called them, when the Valar summoned them, all the Sindar did not refuse the journey. They did come west with Orome and only remained behind just because they wanted to look for their lord Thingol, Elwë. The term Moriquendi, the elves of the darkness, Moriquendi, was offensive to them. Moriquendi meaning elves of the darkness. It was a really offensive term for them. So they are generally not referred to as Moriquendi, and that term was mostly abandoned, and a more politically correct name was coined to replace Moriquendi. That name being Umaniar, which means those not of Aman, and Amaniar, those of Aman. So Vanyar, Noldor, and Teleri, who went with Olwe, are Amaniar, while on the other hand, Sindar, Nandor, and Lyquendi, pretty much every elf that remained in Middle-earth at that time in the history, are Umaniar, except of course only Thingol. That is assuming that all the Avari got turned into orcs, but since none of the Avari really came into our story, we don't have to worry too much about them. So we can pretty much, it's safe to say every elf remaining in Middle-earth at that time, they were all Umaniar, and the elves who became Amaniar were only Vanyar, Noldor, and people of Olwe, the Teleri who followed Olwe. Well, I know this was a really short chapter today. We might have done only 20 to 25 minutes. But I hope it was interesting. It was short, but it was sweet, and I guess all these names and everything might be a lot for many people. So I hope it did help a little bit by me explaining all the origins of the names, as well as how the sundering of the elves happened and what are their divisions and classes. I'll leave this up as well. But yeah, these are all the factions of elves. Later in the story we might get back to this graph again, but for now we have ended our chapter number 4, and next week on Saturday 8th September at 6 p.m. Central European time and 12 p.m. Eastern American time, we will be doing and covering chapter 5, which is called Of Eldamar and the Princess of Eldalië. So make sure to catch that live, or you can also catch all these podcasts, video podcasts on YouTube by searching just DGenXLE. The link is there and it will be in the description as well. You can watch it live on Twitch as well. The link is on your screen as well as it will be in the description. And finally, you can also listen to this in podcast form. It's available on iTunes as well as on Google Podcast, as well as on all other major Android podcast applications. Just search for EstelPod and you will find it, and you can listen to it while you drive to work or come back from work, or are just working and need something in your ear. You can also write to me any feedback or any questions you might have had from any of these sessions. I'll be happy to answer them in the next session. So thank you for watching, and I will catch you guys next week in the next session of Estelore number 8. Goodbye. Thank you for watching, and subscribe please.